My sister dropped her kids off at my doorstep, demanding I watch them for 8 weeks while she went on vacation. When I refused and threatened to call the police, she arranged for me to be assaulted in my own home so she could take them back. Growing up, my sister always got away with anything, no matter how cruel or unreasonable. She was our parents' golden child, a miracle in their eyes. Stunningly beautiful with her thick curly hair and light eyes, she seemed perfect to them. I, on the other hand, had straight hair, dark eyes, and was never considered pretty. Our mothers spent our teenage years comparing us constantly, telling me to dress like my sister and pressuring her to teach me makeup. But my sister was cruel. She'd laugh at me or belittle me whenever I asked for help. That dynamic drove a wedge between us. I rejected the toxic behaviors I saw in my mother, while my sister embraced them, becoming increasingly selfish, believing her beauty gave her power over everyone. My mother's constant comparisons and criticism destroyed my self-esteem. I grew into a quiet, reserved adult, some would say a pushover. Therapy has been helping me find my voice, but standing up for myself, after years of being torn down, hasn't been easy. I can't maintain healthy friendships or romantic relationships. The betrayal runs deep. My sister even slept with my high school boyfriend during senior year, a boy she didn't even like. My parents swept it under the rug, telling me to forgive her. It was then that I realized how much they favored her, and that no one would ever stand up for me, not even my father, who watched my mother tear me down my entire life. But there was one upside to being the ugly sister. I threw myself into my studies. While my sister partied her way through high school, I graduated with a 4.0 and earned a full scholarship to my dream university. I'll never forget the day I found out. I rushed home, excited to share the news with my parents, but my mom didn't even look up from her phone. My dad muttered, "Good job." That was it. I thought earning that scholarship would finally earn me their respect, but my mom barely spoke to me for a week afterward, as if she resented my success. It became clear to me that I was truly alone. Why did my mother hate me so much? Why did she even have me if she was going to spend my entire life hating me? That day, instead of celebrating, I cried myself to sleep, realizing I'd never have a family that loved me. From that moment on, I decided to stop chasing their approval. Instead, I would turn my anger into ambition. I'd focus on building a life they could never give me, a stable, independent life. And I did. I graduated with honors and landed a high-paying job. By 23, I was making 6 figures. Every holiday I'd come home, share my successes with extended family, and receive warm congratulations. My parents, though, barely acknowledged me. One Christmas, when my uncle congratulated me on a promotion, my mom cut him off, saying, "This is boring. Can we change the subject?" She muttered under her breath that it was probably all lies anyway. When I finally bought my first house, I posted about it on social media, and everyone in the family liked the post except my mother. My sister, meanwhile, had failed out of college and gotten pregnant by her first boyfriend. They had another child to try to fix their failing relationship. She was living a chaotic life, but my parents still treated her like gold. Her comments to me grew nastier with every holiday, insulting my clothes or calling me names in front of her kids. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped her 2 children, 10 and 7, at my house one morning, telling them I'd be watching them for the next 2 months. I was shocked. We hadn't spoken since the 4th of July, where she'd insulted my weight yet again. I called her, furious, but she ignored my calls until I threatened to call Child Protective Services, CPS. That's when she finally picked up, and with a sinister tone, she threatened me. She said if I didn't watch her kids, She'd call my job and tell them I wasn't taking my medication for bipolar disorder. The blackmail hit me hard. My career was everything to me, and my sister knew it. I was terrified her lies could ruin everything I had worked for. After she hung up, I was left panicking. I had a trip planned to visit my long-distance boyfriend, Eric, in Australia in a few weeks, a trip that meant everything to me. And now it felt like my life was spiraling out of control. Desperate, I called my mom for help, but she only sided with my sister, as she always did. I snapped. I screamed at her, asking her to name one time my sister had ever been there for me. My mother remained cold and told me I needed to help my sister just this once. When she finally showed up at my house, she continued defending my sister. And then, in a quiet voice, she admitted the truth. My sister wasn't on vacation, she had been flown out by her sugar daddy. I couldn't believe it. I erupted, yelling that my mother had raised a daughter who abandoned her children to chase money. My mom, in her usual way, threw it all back in my face, saying it didn't matter how much I had achieved, that I would always be the ugly duckling. That cut deep. When I screamed at her to leave my house, she shoved me into the coffee table, breaking the vase Eric had given me. Seeing that shattered vase, something inside me broke too. I lost control, screaming at my mother to get out before I called the police. As she stormed out, my nephews came out of their room, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. I was overwhelmed, heartbroken for these kids who were caught in the middle of such a mess. After ordering food for them and trying to make them comfortable, I went upstairs and called Eric. He was my only support, and as I sobbed, he listened, calming me down. He suggested I record my sister's threats as evidence, reminding me that she was unstable and capable of anything. His advice gave me strength. I knew I had to protect myself, and maybe, in doing so, I'd finally find the power to stand up to my sister once and for all. Despite the tension and my deep-rooted fears, something shifted after a couple of days with the boys. I couldn't bear the thought of them feeling neglected or unloved the way I had growing up. Even though my sister had left them under awful circumstances, I realized that they were innocent in all of this. I made a decision. They would feel safe, loved, and cared for while they were with me. It started that evening when I decided to hang out with them and play video games. We ended up having more fun than I expected, bonding over a multiplayer first-person shooter game. The boys were surprised I could actually play, and their giggles and wide-eyed amazement filled the house with a warmth I hadn't felt in ages. They reminded me of the children. They were sweet, funny, and so polite. They weren't like their mom at all, and I loved every minute with them. When I noticed the holes in their socks and how my oldest nephew's clothes looked small on him, I knew I had to do something. It wasn't surprising my sister hadn't packed enough decent clothes for them, but I wasn't going to let that slide. I took them to the mall, determined to give them a day they wouldn't forget. I almost cried watching how excited they were, running from store to store, their eyes lighting up with every new thing. I let them pick whatever they wanted, spoiling them with new clothes, shoes, and even Nintendo Switches. When my youngest nephew, missing his 2 front teeth, flashed me that goofy little smile, I couldn't help but melt. These kids deserved to feel special, loved everything I never got at their age. They hugged me after I got them their Switches, and it broke my heart when my oldest nephew, with tears in his eyes, asked why I was being so kind to them, why they deserved it. I told him they were my boys too, and they deserved to be happy simply because they were kids. He cried harder, confessing how angry he felt at his mom for keeping us apart. I did my best to comfort him, assuring him that even though we hadn't known each other well before, I was here for them now. As they slowly opened up about their life at home, It confirmed what I had feared all along. My sister and her partner were neglecting and mistreating them. I knew I had to act. That night, I cooked them a big dinner and let them play on their new Switches. I called my sister again, ready to carry out the plan my boyfriend and I had devised. Staying calm was hard, but as soon as I mentioned CPS, she freaked out, throwing her usual threats at me. She didn't even care about the kids, just about making sure her lies wouldn't catch up to her. She accused me of being mentally unfit, threatening to spread rumors that would ruin my career. But this time, I was prepared. I recorded the entire call, her vile accusations, her plans to lie about my mental health, everything. When I hung up, I had what I needed to protect myself. The next morning, I made the call to CPS, sharing everything how my sister had abandoned her kids and manipulated me into caring for them. I even sent them the recording. The agent listened carefully and assured me they would begin an investigation right away. My nerves were still shot, but at least I felt like I was taking control. Then came the fallout. My mom called the next day, and before I could stop myself, I let it slip that I had called CPS. She hung up immediately, and I knew she'd go straight to my sister. A part of me regretted telling her, but there was no going back now. My family had never been on my side, and I couldn't trust them. When I arrived at work, my receptionist told me that my supervisor had called an urgent meeting. I knew exactly what was coming. My sister had followed through on her threat, trying to destroy my reputation. Sitting in that meeting, I was nervous, but I had everything I needed to clear my name. My supervisors explained that they had been contacted by a trusted source who claimed I was unmedicated and mentally unstable. I handed over the proof, medical records, letters from my doctors, and verification that I had been on my medication for years. Within minutes, the tension lifted. They apologized for the inconvenience, even praised my recent work performance. My sister's plan had completely backfired. I called her as soon as I left the office, barely able to contain my laughter as I told her how miserably she had failed. She was furious, calling me every name in the book, but I didn't care. I was winning for once. I hung up, but the victory felt short-lived. My sister was crazy, and she wasn't done yet. She threatened to fly back and make me regret everything. I should have been more prepared for what happened next. The following morning, I was jolted awake by someone banging on my door. When I opened it, there stood my sister, with a huge man towering beside her, and my mother behind them. Before I could say anything, the man shoved me to the ground. My nephews woke up to the commotion, terrified. I tried to protect them, but the man grabbed my older nephew and shoved me again, this time into the wall. Everything was spinning. I screamed at my sister, but it was no use. She barked orders at the man in Russian, and he carried my nephews out of the house. As they left, my sister spat in my face. They drove off, taking my boys with them. I collapsed, my heart shattered. I knew I had to act fast. I finally received a call back from the police station after hours of waiting. They had been searching for the Suburban my sister borrowed and had finally located it. The officer who called me was the same one from earlier. He was incredibly helpful and shared many details about the incident. He informed me that they had dispatched 3 police cars to pull over the black SUV, knowing the man inside had already been violent that morning. Despite the officers drawing their firearms, the man charged at them, attempting to attack one of the officers, which resulted in him being shot in the thigh. He had already punched 2 officers in the head and even gave a female officer a black eye. To my disbelief, my sister had also physically assaulted the officer who tried to put handcuffs on her. I tried to imagine my unpredictable sister and this giant man battling a group of cops on the side of the highway. It felt surreal that this chaos was happening in my family. I wasn't watching it on reality TV. I was still in shock from everything the officer shared when he told me that my sister wanted to speak to me. I could hardly believe it, and the officer confirmed that she was demanding to use her one phone call on me. I asked him if he thought she would ask for bail money, and he admitted that was exactly what she was screaming about. I told him I wouldn't take her call and that she could rot in there for all I cared. He chuckled in understanding, and we ended the call without me speaking to my sister. It was a complete mess. Even though my sister was finally behind bars, where I believed she belonged, I learned my nephews were in the care of CPS. While I was relieved they were safe, I was deeply worried about their well-being. To make matters worse, I had only a week left before my trip to Australia, and canceling it would mean losing thousands of dollars in bookings. I had planned this trip meticulously, and I didn't want to offend my boyfriend's family, especially since I hoped to marry him one day. I felt I needed to make a good impression. I called CPS to check on my nephews, hoping to speak with them, but my request was denied. I tried explaining that I was family and one of the only mentally stable relatives they had, but it fell on deaf ears. I was dealing with a different department this time, and they were relentless. Emotionally exhausted and out of options, I spent the week trying to prepare for my trip while randomly bursting into tears over my nephews and their uncertain situation. My boyfriend and I had been eagerly anticipating this trip for months, but now I was consumed with anxiety. All our conversations leading up to my flight revolved around my nervousness. My boyfriend was incredibly kind and supportive, but I couldn't help feeling angry at my sister for how she treated her children and me. I was also frustrated with my parents. My dad was off somewhere, avoiding the chaos, and my mom didn't seem to care about her grandchildren at all. Instead, she enabled my sister's reckless behavior, resulting in her children being placed in the custody of strangers. On the day of my flight, I sat at the airport bar, 2 cocktails deep, scrolling through photos of my nephews. We had taken silly photo booth pictures at the mall, and the sight of those memories made me cry all over again. I promised myself that would be the last time I cried until I landed back in America. I needed to enjoy my time with my boyfriend and not let my sister ruin it, even from thousands of miles away. My time in Australia turned out to be amazing. When I finally saw my boyfriend after months apart, he swept me into his arms like a princess, filling my heart with happiness. Despite everything I had been through in the past weeks, being with him felt healing. He catered to me every moment, and when I met his family, it went remarkably well. They were warm and fun, and we enjoyed many outdoor adventures together. One day, my boyfriend took me to a secret waterfall where we swam and skinny dipped, laughing and kissing for hours. It was one of the most romantic days of my life. But as soon as I returned home, the nightmare with my sister resumed. A few days after landing back in the U.S., I decided to visit the local police station to officially press charges against both my sister and my mom for breaking and entering. They had sent that man to toss me aside so they could barge into my home, and I wasn't going to let that slide. When I filed the charges, I learned that the CPS investigation into my sister was still ongoing, which frustrated me. I couldn't understand how they hadn't found anything conclusive. If they just spoke to my nephews, they would see the trauma they had endured. My sister had been arrested with a man who had attacked multiple officers, making it clear she was an unfit parent. Leaving the police station that day, I felt a mix of satisfaction and frustration. I had filed the charges against my family, but the CPS investigation still hung over me. I couldn't stop worrying about my nephews' safety. Being with strangers couldn't be good for them, even if it was better than being with their mother. I kept thinking about how my sister had dragged them out of my house without letting them grab their belongings. My youngest nephew had a plush dog he took everywhere. I had been sleeping with it ever since they were taken away, and waking up to see it reminded me of their absence. I felt helpless, longing to make things right for them, but powerless until CPS made a decision. After calling CPS daily for updates on my nephews, I finally received news a month after my sister's arrest. They decided to officially remove both boys from her custody and place them in protective care. I was frustrated to hear that it didn't change their current situation, but at least my sister would have to go to court if she wanted custody back. When I asked the CPS agent if it was likely she would win, he told me it depended on whether other suitable relatives came forward. In that moment, I knew I would step up. I opened a separate court case to pursue full custody of my nephews. I was determined I would do whatever it took, no matter how long or expensive the legal battle might be. Before my custody case even began, my charges against my sister for breaking and entering were the first to be addressed. I knew some people might judge me for taking my own sister to court, but I was furious at her and felt it was the right thing to do. I wanted to follow the law, especially since my primary goal was to secure my nephew's safety and well-being. On the first day of our trial, I saw my sister for the first time since she had broken into my home and allowed that man to attack me. The last time I had seen her, she had spun a glob of spit into my face, so it was fair to say neither of us was eager for a reunion. As the trial began, the judge mentioned my custody case against her, which my sister hadn't known about. Her public defender must not have informed her, and she found out for the first time in the courtroom. My sister never reacted well to bad news. Once she realized what was happening, she snapped. In the middle of the courtroom, she angled her body towards me, screamed my name, and lunged at me like a crazed hyena. She clawed at my face, attempting to rip chunks of my hair out. It didn't take long for the bailiff to intervene, but she managed to bite my forearm with such force that it left a nasty wound, which later became infected. This chaos unfolded right in front of the judge. Once everything calmed down, I knew my sister had just sealed her fate. It took nearly 2 years for all her criminal charges to be resolved, but eventually she was locked up for good, serving a life sentence due to her numerous offenses. Her chances of appeal were nearly non-existent. I never dropped the breaking and entering charges against my mom. The only reason she avoided prison was by testifying against my sister, throwing her under the bus in court. I couldn't help but feel satisfaction as I watched my mom blame my sister for everything while shedding her usual crocodile tears. It was surreal to see my mom betray her golden child, but it had taken a lifetime of chaos for it to happen. That day, as I looked up at my mom on the stand, I knew it was the last time I would ever want to see her. I had seen enough of her and my sister's toxicity for a lifetime, and I was done. My sister had turned my life into an endless legal battle, and all I wanted was to return to a normal day-to-day life. The custody battle for my nephews dragged on, complicated further by their biological father and his family fighting me in court for custody. I didn't care. There was nothing that could keep me from my nephews now that my sister was locked up. After nearly 2 years of legal battles, I finally won full custody of my boys. I will never forget the joy on their faces when they came home. They smiled so wide and hugged me so tightly when they saw the bedrooms I had decorated just for them. In my youngest nephew's room, he ran to show me his rediscovered Switch. I surprised him with his beloved plush dog and caught him in a tight embrace. Before I knew it, my eldest nephew joined us, both boys crying into my hair, telling me how much they missed me. With tears in his eyes, my eldest boy looked up at me and said, "I knew it, Auntie. I just knew you would come back for us one day."